I'm going to bring up our chairman of NASTF right now, and after he says a couple of words, he's going to break right into the very first presentation on telematics. So our NASTF chairman of the board is Charlie Gorman, who is the president and CEO of the Equipment and Tool Institute. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks, Skip. I was asked to, we've been doing a lot of work on telematics, and it seems to be like it's a hot topic right now, but there also seems to be an awful lot of mystery to it, misunderstandings. So my job today, in the next half hour or so, is to try to explain why telematics is important to you as technicians and shop owners, car companies, so on. And to explain why telematics connectivity is not a threat to the automakers. In fact, aftermarket telematics connectivity can actually be beneficial to the aftermarket and to the automakers combined. So let's start with a definition of telematics. Telematics is the transmission of useful information remotely to wirelessly to and from a vehicle. I added the word vehicle because telematics actually takes into consideration much more than vehicle communications. I think a good example of telematics is Life Alert, where someone pushes a button or they've got something hooked directly to a pacemaker or a heart device, and when something happens, it notifies someone who can then send an ambulance or whatever to that person's house or some sort of rescue. That's a good example of telematics, but we're going to concentrate, of course, on telematics as it has to do with the vehicle. So whenever you hear the word telematics, we're concentrating on that. So it's useful information. So in the automotive world, what is this useful information? And this is kind of a busy slide, I know, but and there's two colors to it. There's red and green. Green represents those kinds of things that are included in telematics that do not require connectivity to the vehicle's diagnostic or system bus. GPS navigation, of course, focus video and sound, entertainment systems like, I'm thinking of things like Pandora and so on, satellite radio. Are examples. And then emergency services, just like that other example, but there are actually two kinds. Emergency services that are manual, where you hit the tree and then hopefully you still have enough left in your arm to push the button. And the automatic kind, which is in red here because it requires data from the vehicle's onboard network, sensors that an airbag is deployed or something along that line. Driver tracking, of course, uses data from other services listed here that are in green, but there's also use cases like insurance companies' safe driving programs, rental car tracking, fleet services, teen driver programs. And these actually do tap into the system because they look for certain driving habits like miles per hour and that kind of things. Even things like squealing tires can be tracked from the vehicle's sensors. And this actually took up 2 slides. And then, of course, there's the vehicle maintenance information. This is all in red because it all requires access to the vehicle's system bus and information from the sensors and the computers. It includes maintenance schedules based on time, mileage, repair requirements based on code setting, remote diagnostics, limited to code notification now, but it could include complex diagnostics in the future, including self-tests such as cylinder balance, rich lean diagnostics, EGR activation, et cetera, et cetera. Remote inspection. This was once affectionately called OBD3. I'm not sure if that term's ever used today or not, but now they're calling it remote inspection. And convenience, I wrote in here, convenience seems to trump right to privacy. Even, people say, well, I don't want the government to know what I'm doing with my vehicle and so on. But yet, look at the toll booths and how many people are getting those devices, and the government does know where you are every time you pay a toll, but that is one heck of a convenience. So people seem to go towards the convenience versus right to privacy. So there is some growth in this area. And then there's as many ancillary applications under the above that you can dream up. So this is kind of what's going on, you know, from a broad brush of what's going on in the telematics industry. At ETI, we tried to find out how shop owners and technicians feel about these services and just how important they are to them. So we ran a study, and in 2010, which is, you know, in the telematics world is probably old now, and we need to do another one, but it's the most recent data we have. And we try to measure the market's current level of familiarity with telematics technology. We try to evaluate what factors are important to industry in implementing a remote diagnostic system. And they are struggling with it. Shops are struggling with the, you know, trying to figure out what these things are. Explore price points for hardware and monthly service fees associated with telematics. Explore the industry's opinion relative to who should bear the expense of telematics hardware and services, and learn more about concerns and questions the industry has relative to telematics. In this area, I think we kind of missed the target a little bit. The concept was that telematics in the aftermarket would take on a structure where parts companies, for example, might actually put a whole network together, and then through their loyalty programs would support, in other words, the shop is a part of the loyalty program. He sells these devices to the end users, and then they buy their parts that they need from this from the parts supplier. And we assumed the following: that most systems would consist of a hardware box and that plugs into the J1962 diagnostic connector, has a cellular transceiver on board, and communicates with the data facility. Again, the data facility could be run by a parts company, or it could be run by an equipment company, it could be run by anyone. Most telematics products will require collaboration of companies, providing different parts of the solution, of course. And the elements of collaboration include overall system developer, independent shops, fleets, et cetera, of course, parts companies and warehouse distributors with supplier loyalty programs, tool and equipment companies, cellular providers, and of course, motorists. Without motorists, none of this works. Here's what we came up with. You'll notice on the far left there that only 31% of the total shops that answered the survey are knowledgeable about telematics. And then if you look to the right there, that we have two charts really. One is new cars seem to be more aware, new car dealers seem to be more aware than others, and large shops seem to be more aware than others. And there might be some cross-pollination there. Large shops tend to be dealers, so that's probably one of the reasons why that's up there. But overall knowledge of 31% we thought was rather low. And then reasonable cost of hardware. And again, we thought we kind of had a grasp of what the model would be, but this has turned out to be kind of elusive, and I'm not sure that even the model is accurate. But this is kind of based on a price point of $50 or less, 50 to 100, 100 to 250, or more than 250. It shows how much, what is a reasonable cost for the hardware or the box that would go into the vehicle and plug into the J1962 connector. And it's all over the map. New car dealers and tire dealers felt that the market would bear more money. I'm not sure why tire dealers felt that way, but they did. And independent repair shops were kind of even across the board. But again, without that lack of knowledge, I'm not sure how valuable this is. And then reasonable monthly service fee per month And overall, that came out to $18.30 for a service fee. So that's on top of the cost of the box. And then based on the type of shop, other felt that it would be higher than a new car dealer or anyone else. And then the number of technicians in the shop, if it's over 20 technicians, they felt that that was the highest, that it would go as high as $29 a month. Who should cover the cost? And here we had owner, driver, the shop, supplier loyalty program or other. And of course, the owner driver was the highest. Everybody felt that they should pay for this service. However, the motorists weren't there to defend themselves, because I'm sure they would have picked some, they would have picked at one of the other three columns. This has been one of the toughest things, is to nail down this market. What is this market? What is the magic combination of apps, if you will, that will cause telematics to take off? And no one has really discovered that magic combination yet. And so these questions are still up in the air, and that is, who should cover the cost, and how much should it be, and what are the applications that should be involved? But I think it's safe to say that, you know, once that hits, once somebody finds that magic number, I think it's safe to say that just like iPhone and other things, that telematics in vehicles will skyrocket. It'll, you know, once we hit that tipping point, it'll really take off. Summary of the survey comments. This is from the comments section of our survey. Shops do not feel they have enough information to make decisions regarding telematics. No surprise there. They are concerned about the cost of this type of system and whether there'll be enough customer demand. That's everyone's question. And many of the independent shops felt that telematics is a way to push business to dealers. This is a conspiracy theorists. It's a gimmick, which I don't think it is, but a lot felt that it was. And it's another way for Big Brother to know the customer's business. And that came from the tin hat crowd. Whoops, I didn't. You told me that? So who is interested in telematics? And, you know, obviously the automakers are, all these entities, including the automakers and tool and equipment companies. I put in some major bullets there with some minor ones under them. It's not just the automakers, but it's some of their supporters and suppliers. Fleet service companies, insurance companies, the government, of course, crash notification and event recording, and remote emissions and safety testing. I added safety because that's a big deal in Europe, especially. They don't do just emissions testing in Europe. They do safety testing on a huge scale. So they're looking at ways to do some kind of telematics-based safety testing as well. Parts manufacturers, suppliers like Napa and CarQuest and AutoZone have shown interest. And again, all these people are interested, but no one knows what the magic combination is at this point. Now, from now on, we're going to spend our time, though, mostly on the diagnostic side of it, because that's what is most important to shop owners, tool equipment companies, and the automakers, I think, from this standpoint. So we're going to spend more time on that than anything. We put this little chart together that even though all these entities are interested, the automakers are the big boys on the block on this, because they own the network, and it gives them an advantage. They can put all the parts together, basically, except for maybe the actual cell connectivity, but all the other parts that they have direct control over. And then that brings up the question, well, why is it important to the aftermarket? Why would you guys be interested in it? And I want to paint a scenario for you of how I think this comes down and why it is important. You know, thanks to the Clean Air Act, legislation, right to repair legislation, and NASTF efforts, volunteer efforts, motorists are notified by the dealer or the aftermarket notification systems that maintenance is required. I mean, that happens today. You know, you base it on, well, it's been 3 months, a flyer goes out, you can handle that repair. If a code comes on a vehicle, you make a decision of where you go with that vehicle. Do you go to a dealer? Do you go to an aftermarket shop? You make that decision based on just that light flashing. But in the telematics, after proliferation of telematics, that decision might be made sooner. Because if you're hooked to a system, and let's say it's an OEM system like OnStar, and if OnStar did more than it does today, OnStar could come on and basically say, here's where you take the vehicle. They could even possibly withhold information and say, we're not telling you what's wrong with it until you get here. Or maybe they don't know. But my point is that they have an advantage of saying, this is where the car should go. These are the parts that should be purchased, and so on. So it can, I'm not saying that's the way it is today, but in the future, that's what could be developed around telematics. So whichever telematics system is on board has an advantage because it will notify the repair facility in its network and inform the motorist that the car has to be taken in. So with that, now let's look at why it can be advantageous for the OEMs to work with the aftermarket regarding telematics access. And I took some liberty here. Automakers, and especially on the last bullet on the second slide, but automakers and new car dealerships are not interested in all the services telematics provide. For example, I don't think automakers are really interested in running their own inspection network for emissions. And then having to do all the things the government does regarding that. OEMs are now also courting app developers. We really saw that this spring, or late winter and early spring, where they're courting app developers to get their ideas regarding apps that would be on their vehicles. This is the concept of trying to figure out what the magic combination is. And this is good and needs to be expanded to include diagnostics. Many multi-brand fleets want to have one telematics solution that covers all their vehicle brands, and that can't be done by a single OEM. In other words, I doubt that General Motors will ever have telematics for Ford, for example. So, whereas independents can develop systems that go across brands, and that can be important to a multi-brand fleet. And there's plenty of business out there for everybody in the telematics market. I think there will be anyway. Just like in the repair market, we find out that there's plenty of work for everyone. Companies who have embraced the aftermarket, provide good diagnostics and good information, have found that it does not have a negative effect on their dealer organizations, and in fact has actually in some cases helped those dealer organizations, especially in their used car departments. So there is plenty of business out there, and it is everyone's best interest to avoid another right to repair fight, I think. I think cooperation at this point, working out what we need to get done, makes a lot more sense than waiting till the last minute and saying, let's write a law. Because just like everyone said before, these laws have a tendency to be something that no one likes. So these are compelling reasons, but they may not be the most important. And this is the slide I kind of took some liberty with. I want to point out some things here. Motors, this is a kind of a chart. And by the way, that word on the top there is hypothetical because I couldn't find any really good real data. But I think if you think about this, you can kind of go along with it. This line here is a total repairs done by model year. So this is a one-year snapshot, let's say. This is 2012, and these are the model years being serviced in that year. And then this line here represents all the repairs. So, and this is what you would expect, that there's a high number of repairs, a lot of warranty work going on in this area right here. Really low aftermarket participation in those early years. And then this is dealership activity on the older vehicles as it falls down. So, once a car goes out of warranty and becomes 5 years old, that car is less expensive. They don't want to spend as much money on the repair. They go to the aftermarket. That's why this number goes up. So here's where they cross. And again, I think the concept is good, but there's this whole middle area right here, this middle area, where the aftermarket I call it the aftermarket sweet spot. It's where the cars there's enough of them out there, and they have a tendency to break, and it's what you guys see most of the time. And while that's happening, on the dealership side, those numbers are going down. And it seems to me that that's when we say there's plenty of work out there for everybody, who's going to take care of those vehicles during that sweet spot period? Telematics systems will get old on vehicles just like every other part on them. The hardware will get old, and even if it's updated, even if the software is updated, it's still an old system. Now, you might have an older iPhone, like an iPhone 1 that works, but you don't want it because the new one does so much better and so much more. So again, adding devices to these vehicles in an aftermarket way may be the best way to support these vehicles when they get to be a certain age. And of course, the repairs change too. The type of repairs that are done on these vehicles changes with time. Under warranty, certain things have a tendency to happen. TSBs are issued. What happens to that car when it gets 8 years old, the kinds of repairs that are required change. And sometimes the aftermarket companies do a better job of supporting those kinds of repairs than dealerships can. Once a dealership repair information hits a certain stage, you notice it doesn't get updated anymore. It stays pretty static. That isn't necessarily true. Companies like you'll hear about it this afternoon more, but companies like Identifix and so on constantly update their database on what's actually happening with those vehicles, and that can be done through a telematics system just as easily as OEM type repairs. So it seems to me that from a brand loyalty standpoint, it would behoove car companies to support an aftermarket telematics effort. So again, there's no numbers on this. It's just the idea to give you a concept of what happens out there and what happens with the repairs. I think the average age of a vehicle right now is 10.8 years that are in the fleet, registered vehicles. We're putting in about 15 million in this country, 15 million new cars a year, and we're taking out about 11 million. So the fleet constantly builds, and that makes that number just keep moving out. So how do we prevent telematics from becoming the next battleground from a legislation standpoint? Organizations like NASTF, ETI, SAE, along with right to repair entities, need to work together to develop some robust standards that will allow safe and secure telematics access to more than just the OEMs. And it means developing aftermarket infrastructures that allow companies to combine disciplines to create complete solutions combining aftermarket information, diagnostics, parts, and service outlets. There may be a need for the OEMs to simply package certain information similarly to what they do for in-shop diagnostics. I can tell you that at ETI, we get a lot of tool companies that want to join the Institute. And our number one now is scan tool companies. I think it's 80% of our members are involved in scan tools somehow. That's huge difference in the last few years. And a lot of those companies aren't traditional diagnostic companies, that like a Snap-on scan tool. They're telematics companies wanting to have the same access that a scan tool has to do something usually fairly specific. So in some cases, you know, let me give you an example. Telematics company calls me and says, "Do you have this information?" And the information they want is airbag deployment, miles, odometer, seat belt status, fuel level, so they can do mileage calculations. And that's it. But if you know anything about automotive diagnostics, those PIDs, those parameters that they want are all over the vehicle. I mean, some of them are not even available. A lot of them aren't available because they're not considered to be diagnostic and they're not considered to be emissions. Odometer, believe it or not, can be a proprietary PID. So packaging these things into a telematics bundle might be a quick fix for some telematics companies. So let's go into this a little bit, into some detail. I apologize for the graphic there. I hope you can kind of see it. But this is a typical automaker telematics system. You've got the a network gateway here. This is not the G1962 connector. You got the vehicle network here, and then you've got some sort of transceiver, usually through a cell phone or something like that. Then to an infrastructure, and this infrastructure is a LAN transceiver here, OEM data center, and then it goes to the dealer and to the end user, to the vehicle owner, to the end user. This is kind of the block structure of how a telematics network works. They're all explained over here on the side. In the aftermarket, it's different because we don't get that gateway here. Oh, wrong button. So that gateway that I was talking about gets replaced by the J1962 connector here, right here. And everything else remains the same. This is an add-on transceiver. This is the J1962 connector and some device that plugs into it that actually gets the information out of the vehicle and onto the cellular network. This is problematic because constant connection to the J1962 connector disables OEM telematics access. So if you know, in some cases, you actually turn off some other functions when you plug into it. Only one device can be plugged in at a time. This is a problem because they may have some other activity going on. For example, some companies actually do like if you have a van that does a wheelchair lift, they'll have a connection into the J1962 connector that raises the RPM on the engine while the wheelchair lift is going on. Well, if that's there, you may not be able to do anything else with that connector. And since all J1962 connectors are under the dash, near the pedals, permanently plugged in telematics devices causes the wires to hang, and that can be dangerous too. And since all these systems were designed to have, they weren't designed to be hooked up permanently plugged in, critical network functions can be interfered with and or slowed down. In other words, you could take up system bus time and it would slow down things like, we know of examples where ESC, for example, has been turned off on vehicles because something was plugged in. So you have those things to worry about too. And then there's always the battle of whose fault is it? Is it the device's fault or is it the vehicle network's fault? And those arguments can go on forever. So here's what we think it needs to be done. And again, this is just a solution for aftermarket access to the system, and that is to be able to develop separate infrastructures altogether. So in this diagram, it's basically the same as before, except for now we have a universal gateway here. Where is it? Yeah. Where you can, here, where both add-on transceivers and OEM transceivers can be hooked to this gateway. So this is where the standardization takes place, right here. No, no. Well, it wouldn't take a connector. There is no connector. This is Bluetooth or wireless USB or wireless or built into the car, right? But there would be a standardized gateway that others could use to get into the vehicle. And the OEMs could still have their proprietary system, of course. And then you can see from here, these infrastructures are separate. And then the owner of the vehicle can choose which one he uses or both. Okay, so that's kind of the concept of where we might go. It's the least intrusive on the OEMs to do this. There has been some work being done, which I'll get into in just a minute here. There are some security concerns, though, and this is legitimate concern by everybody about security. And whenever there's outside access to a vehicle, you have to worry about security, a malicious attack. I think one guy put it pretty funny. He says, what if, somebody hacked into the OnStar program and had all the even VINs hit the brakes and all the odd ones hit the accelerator? Just for fun, I don't think that's possible, but we do have to concern ourselves with security. The network gateway, the gateway must be made secure against malicious attack. Now, there is work already being done. There's a merging of technology taking place here. Car companies are working on something they call DUIP, or Diagnostics over Internet Protocol. BMW uses it today. Others are going to be putting it on soon. It's basically an Ethernet hookup to the vehicle, which could eliminate the VCI altogether, the vehicle communications interface. So you could take a laptop and someday maybe just plug directly into a vehicle and start doing your diagnostics and so on. That's very doable. It's not in the too distant future. There is an ISO committee working on it already, ISO 13400. But they thought that, if this happens, we really need to control access to the vehicle. And they started talking about what levels of access are there. What they want to do is they want to actually control the levels of access that you can have. In other words, an insurance company doesn't need very in-depth access to the vehicle, and there's just certain specific things that they need to have. For I&M programs or remote I&M, there's just a few parameters that they need to run their is this vehicle polluting program. Diagnostics, enhanced diagnostics for aftermarket or dealership diagnostics would go farther into the vehicle and be able to do more things. And then there would be a factory level access where they could do engineering work and so on, which only the OEM would have access to. This kind of makes sense to me to do this and to develop it and make it part of the standard. And I think that it would probably also maybe even have some level of approval from the OEM. In other words, device manufacturers who want to have this kind of access would have to seek some level of approval to have that level of access. It just kind of makes sense that that's where we would have to go. Yeah, these are the levels. So I think this is going to be on the website, isn't it, Skip? This whole presentation. Yeah, so you can go through those levels of access that I just mentioned there. And then, of course, I always urge this of all the OEMs. We've been doing it for years now, and that is, if there are really sensitive parts of the modules that the repair industry has no business being in, and they do exist, separate them, tuck them away, and make sure that you don't use the same algorithm for something simple, and then not be able to give it to the aftermarket because it's also the one that you can do memory replacement with, for example. We've run into that quite often where OEMs don't think about the aftermarket. They don't have that in their mind when they design these things. And it turns out it's very difficult to provide information simply because they didn't think about a third party wanting to have access to it. Then on this slide, I have put together some activity that's going on right now. There is, I think that SAE, ETI, NASTF, CARE, and others, along with the Automaker associations, need to sit down and work this out. I know it can be done. And there are some works that we need to study to make sure that we include the work that's already been done, ISO 13185, telematics applications supported by nomadic and mobile devices, AutoSAR, which is a little off the target, but yet they're doing a lot of work on the infotainment side, and NGTP, Next Generation Telematics Pattern, which is also a European initiative. Has been working in, BMW has been kind of in charge of that one. So I think that there's a lot of work to build on. I think it can be done. We're trying to get our European organizations involved, like European Garage Equipment Association involved in this as well, because there are initiatives through AFCAR in Europe to do the same thing. So ETI and other organizations have shown an interest in spending some money and providing personnel to help develop the necessary agreements and standards. I think it's paramount that we avoid another prolonged right to repair battle, only to end up with difficult to implement requirements that no one is happy with. So I hope that kind of answers some of your telematics questions. Thank you.